how are you finding it, and how do you see your role here in the time ahead?
Well, it's a mixture of being overwhelming in terms of the volume of information that you receive. It's underwhelming in that it is fading, decaying grandeur of the British Empire that reeks of snobbery from every pore in the building. So it's those mixtures of just trying to find your feet, and what I'm looking to do is to work with colleagues, learn from colleagues, because although I'm viewed as an experienced parliamentarian, it's a different terrain here, and therefore you have to make sure that you understand it. So it's about learning from your colleagues, working with your colleagues to advance the interests of Scotland, which is why I joined the SNP many, many years ago.
So obviously the SNP won the election in Scotland on the position of a fresh referendum on independence. Seems likely that Boris Johnson is intransigent on that point. So how do you see that conflict over the course of the year?
Well, we have to keep pressing, because clearly it's a democratic outrage. The people of Scotland have already given the SNP a mandate. That has been reinvigorated by the outcome of the election, with not simply the SNP winning handsomely, but the Tories being defeated quite convincingly. They lost more than half their seats. They stood on a clear platform of no Indy Ref 2 and were rejected by the electorate. But it does seem likely that it's going to be rejected. What worries me most of all is the fact that Johnson is talking about a transformative agenda. We know what that's code word for. It's the code word for what Thatcher did in terms of dismantling our economy, our industrial base. He's now going to roll back the gains that were made by my parents' and grandparents' generations of a welfare state. The whole ethos of the values of our society that we adhere to are now under threat as they seek to marketise and privatise social provision. So I think we've got to form a common, popular, united front, whatever terminology we care to use here in Scotland. We have to reach out to other political parties, not the Conservative Party, but to every other political party, whether they're, moderately right of centre or to the left. And we've got to reach out beyond the political base to those involved in other groups and just to ordinary people, as well as, of course, in particular, to the trade union movement.
So do you think that's the crucial alternative to focus on if there isn't the basis for a fully sound legal referendum in the course of this year?
Well, I don't think it's either or, it's both. And I don't think that actually the two conflict. The two run in parallel and in harmony. I think it's right that we demand a referendum and we have it as soon as we can. But in the interim, what we've got to do is not to put all the eggs in one basket. We've got to make sure that we lay the base. And so running in parallel with that has to be a campaign to protect our people. I joined the SNP because we've always had two aims. The first was to advance the cause of an independent Scotland, and the second was to advance Scottish interests, and that means protecting them as well as advancing them. So the two aren't in conflict, the two are in fact united. If we want to make sure we maximise the right or the ability to get a referendum and indeed to win it when we get it, then we've got to build that base, and at the same time to protect ourselves from the threat that's coming, and it is a severe threat. Then we have to ensure that we reach out and we follow that common front.
And you wrote about some of these ideas recently in your article in the Scottish Left Review about sort of bringing in more people from the Labour Party and the Labour movement. Practically, what would that look like? Are you talking about something in the realms of the likes of the Scottish Constitutional Convention and kind of having a formal structure like that to include cross-party voices?
I think these things are embryonic. I think I would like to see that. I would like to see Scottish parliamentarians from both Holyrood and Westminster brought together. I'd like to see council leaders and other elected representatives brought together. It has to eventually be a body, as with the Constitutional Convention, that self-generates, so it can't be at the whim or control of any one political party. So I think I would first of all like to see parliamentarians brought together, and I think we've seen movement from people who aren't in the SNP, and they don't have to come to the SNP, but are moving towards an agreement with us that Scotland has to have the right to choose. But I think more importantly, as part of building this popular front, we've got to widen it. And that's why there's a role for the STUC and trade union movement. So let's get good people of like minds together to protect, because time is of the essence. The election was the 12th of December. We're now into January. The Queen's speech is, being laid out. The finance bill is coming in. The threat is going to be real, and people are going to be feeling it in their terms and conditions of employment, in their pay packets and whatever else that's going to befall us. So we've got to move on, and we move on with people coming together. They don't have to join up for the SNP. They don't have to support independence. I think what they have to do is to recognise Scotland's right to choose its own future, but they also have to be prepared to reach out and work collectively to protect our people from the harm that's going to be threatening them.
Something else we've seen is the constitutional status quo being under threat from Westminster. They've obviously ignored the Sewell Convention. There's been the EU withdrawal bill power grab against competencies of the Scottish Parliament. We've seen, for instance, repeated attempts to set up a safe consumption room for people that suffer from drug addiction, blocked for years now by the Home Office. Is there an argument that the Scottish Government and Scottish parliamentarians at Holyrood have to be more assertive in pushing the boundaries of constitutional powers at Holyrood on areas like drugs law, social security, migrants' rights and other areas where people are demanding material action now?
Well, I think it's not just the Scottish Government. I think, good people in Scotland through this constitutional convention, convocation, call it what you like, have to say that, as well as ensuring that we have the right to choose our own future, as well as preparing the groundwork to protect ourselves from the harm that's coming, we also have to advance interests by looking at making sure that we get the powers to be able to deal with safe consumption rooms, that we tackle the issues that constrain Scotland. I've come down and been reviewing some issues on alcohol and indeed on firearms. They're still overwhelmingly reserved to Westminster. We have to have powers either devolved or action taken. So I think what we need to do is to look at finding areas there, support the Scottish Government when they make their call for it, make sure that we get public support for it. And I look back to previous instances. That's how we got power over drink driving and reduced the limit that has made Scotland a better, safer place. It's how we got powers over air weapons. There are other things akin to that again run not contrary to the principal position of seeking the second referendum, building the popular base, but actually advance Scottish interests. So on those issues, we should be seeking the powers. Are you going to make Scotland a safer place? If the UK government says, no, we're not, well, give us the powers and we build it. That's why, as I say, all credit to my previous colleague, Mr Thompson, who drove the drink driving issue forward. People in Scotland said, this is a good thing to do. It's sensible. We demand it. And I think that's what we've got to do again.
If the Home Office continues to refuse to devolve powers, though, is there a case of putting forward unilateral legislation on that so that there is some form of legal basis for a consumption room and challenging the Conservative government to take that to court?
I think that's problematic, and I think that's something the Scottish Government would have to discuss with Police Scotland, in particular with the Lord Advocate. There may be reasons for that, but I think that's something I would be wary of. I think, first of all, we've got to lay the political argument, we've got to lay the moral argument, we've got to get people behind us who say this is just common sense. Why are the Tories being intransigent? That's why we delivered on minimum unit pricing, on reducing the drink driving limit, on tackling air weapons. Ordinary people in Scotland who might have said, I don't care about a referendum and I might vote no, said we certainly need to take action on these issues. So I think, we need to take each issue as it comes. So it's, moving on from those two points running in parallel, it's actually three. It is about, as I say, demanding Indy Ref 2. It is about building the popular front, but it's also about probing and pushing forward on particular issues to make Scotland a better place where the people of Scotland say, why on earth are Westminster burying their head in the sand? And, it can work.